Hi guys, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another YouTube live to learn JMeter performance and more. Please let me know if you are able to hear me in the chat. I know this is streaming in LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, but I can chat only via LinkedIn, YouTube. Other stream platforms are not supported yet. So if you have any questions, please visit the YouTube channel and go to this video. You can post your questions there. So today, before we get started, let us give a shout out to our sponsor, Redline 13. So if you want to run a high scale load test in your AWS infrastructure, you can check it out, Redline 13, which is a more affordable solution for high volume testing. So without further ado, let us get started. So today we are going to learn about data parameterization in JMeter. In last session, we had Ibrahim to where he shared the tips and tricks and how to record in JMeter and how to set up JMeter, how to install, launch. So those things we have learned. So today we are going to start with some basic concepts in JMeter, which is data parameterization. So please post your questions. If you have anything related to data parameterization, only we will cover the advanced concepts eventually. But as of now, let us get started with the basic things. So hi Surendra, thank you for joining. Hi nice boy, thank you for joining, and thanks everyone who are listening in the other platforms. Okay, so now let me share my screen. So I'm going to move my rearrange some windows here quickly. Let me share my screen. Hope you can see my screen. So please mention whether you're able to see my screen on the chat or not so that I can proceed further. So before that, let me just hide these text so that you can see the clear screen. Hi, Funny. Thank you for joining. I hope everybody can see my screen, right? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Funny, for the confirmation. Okay, let me quickly open the pet store. So here in last session, we have seen how to record the JPEG store, and we recorded some simple flow where we are able to add to cart some random item, and then we are able to check out. And first, before we see about data parameterization in JMeter, first let us understand why we need data parameterization. So whenever you test an application for performance or functional, so basically you feed different sets of data to make sure the text field or drop down or the button click or some selection in the screen is working fine or not with the different sets of output input, so that we can validate the functionality, and then we can validate our test case so that we can have some high number of test coverage. So similar approach we have to take in performance testing. So this will help you to test the real world scenario. So that is why we need data parameterization. So it is a concept where we give multiple sets of input whenever you send a request, and then we will make sure it is working fine for whatever you send. It is properly processing in the backend or not. So this is very high level definition of data parameterization. So why we need this? If you keep sending the same test data again and again, what will happen? It will get cached in some layer, and then whenever you run a performance testing, it may read from the cache, and you might see some better performance in the response time. And when you deploy the same application in the production, then the behavior might be different, and you may not be able to validate the performance. So that is why it is very important, critical to test your application with a unique test of data. Basically, try to be unique as much as possible. In some cases, you might be end up in using same data, but that is fine. But at least make sure you have some thousands of records in your test data file, so that any tool, whatever the tool you're using, it will pick up from the each line uniquely or sequentially. You can configure that, and then it will send along with your request. So this is very critical in any performance testing project or process. So without data parameterization, I don't recommend to create scripts. So even if you're testing a small piece of functionality, make sure you have enough set of data so that you'll be testing the real world scenario. So any questions, please post your questions in the chat. So I have not started it. We are going to deep dive into data parameterization. So I'm not doing anything on the screen. I will zoom in when the concept, when we are going to see the concept. Okay. So how many of you do data parameterization ahead of testing? Say for example, you have a project for 2 weeks, and when you start the test data thing, so you start very early or you just start when you before running that test. So any thoughts, please post your comments, I will go through. So what I do is whenever I start a project, whenever just getting started, in the inception phase itself, I plan the test data based on the workload model. Say, for example, I'm going to test with 1,000 users, 1,000 virtual users, and I'm running for say 1 hour duration, and I might be testing with say 10,000 TPS. I'm just throwing some number. So, so there is some formula also you can use how many records you need, but what I generally go is just generate as much as possible. So suppose if you're testing with 10,000 TPS, have something like 1 million records or 2 million records. Just store as much as possible in a test data file. Even you can split your test data in multiple files and then you can keep it. So this is one of the thing I usually do. My recommended way is to read from a file. So that you can run your scripts easily. You can create your scripts quickly, and no need to focus on the configuration, because any tool if you take, I'm talking about GUI based tools, they will have a feature where you can configure the reading the content from a file. But if you take non-GUI based tool like Locust or K6, they might have the library, or in case of Locust and all, you have to use some generic library, Python library, to read the files. But in case of GUI, you have that luxury of configuring the test data. And if you take JMeter, the built-in core functionality is more than enough. But in some cases, you might end up in using the third-party plugins. So I'm not going to cover any third-party plugin here. We are going to see only the core features of JMeter. And another way is to read the data from the database. So you have definitely you would have QA or your stage environment database, and then you can store all your test data test data in the database, and then you can read it from programmatically or using the some samplers. But reading the database also, it will have its own bottleneck, because you need to configure the database connection, pool configuration, resources. So again, there is another overhead will be there. So unless you need to read from database, I don't recommend this approach as well. So these are some primary two things you can do. And otherwise, there are some API calls you can make. So you can develop some API calls, and you can read from the you can just get the particular test data from the API, and then you can just send it along with your request. So again, whenever you're using some API, you will have the API as a bottleneck. So any approach if you take, there is some could be some bottleneck, but file based approach, file based test data parameterization is very easy to implement and less overhead. So that is what these are the three things you need to take care how you want to do data parameterization. So recommended is file based data parameterization. Database and other options you can keep it aside. Unless you don't have any other option to use, you can go with the other two. Otherwise, you can go with the file based operations. So next question. Okay, so now I have fixed the approach, the strategy, what I'm going to do. And next question will arise: how to generate the test data? So that is one of the common question I usually get. So there are multiple ways you can handle this problem. So one is, be yourself. You generate using some library, using Python or any other language you are comfortable. You just generate it based on your requirement on your own. For example, I want to generate some random zip code. So you can generate the zip code by writing some regular expressions, or you can generate some random address, first name, last name. So these are the common things you may need in any application, and you can write something on your own and then you can generate based on your requirement. So this is one way you can follow. And another way is you can leverage some public websites. So let me just go to some Google and let us just type, say, generate test data, and just hit enter. So here you can see there are a lot of links you are getting. So here you can just go to the first link, generatedata.com, and here you can just select whatever you want to generate. Say here name, phone, email address, street address, and you can choose the format you want. But again, you have to take your own risk here because you are using some third party. So make sure you read the license terms and whether you're allowed to use this test data in your project. So those things you have to take care. Then you can use these kind of libraries. And if you search in GitHub also, there are a lot of open source projects are available. You can just follow the instructions in the README and then you can generate it on your own. So this is a quick way of generating something commonly known test data. But if you want to use only your project related test data, for example, order numbers, or you want something very specific to your project, some format, then you have a couple of options. One is you have to contact your QA team. Definitely QA would have completed before you start the project. So QA team will have some knowledge about, okay, how to generate the test data. They might have some scripts. Then you can reuse the scripts instead of reinventing the wheel again. So that is one approach you can take. Or some organizations, they might have a dedicated team for the test data management. So in that case, you can raise a ticket with them or you can contact them and then you can just explain your requirements. Okay, this is my requirements for these many records I need. So could you please generate it? So they might honor your request and then they can take care. Otherwise, you can another approach is taking a dump from production. So again, this is very critical, very risky also because you need to adhere the PII, HIPAA compliance, those things, and you have to scramble your data. There are various algorithms are available to scramble the data because you cannot use customer sensitive data, right? So you have to be very careful whenever using some production dump. You have to hash it, you have to scramble it before you use. So before you use any production data, make sure you get an approval, follow the process because security is very critical. You don't want to get in a trouble. So these are some of the ways you can generate the test data. And JMeter like tool or any tool if you take, they will have something called built-in functions. Random functions will be there. So we are not going to deep dive into the functions now, but there are ways you can generate using the random. Say for example, random date or random string or timestamp. You can just travel between future date, future time or past time. So you can just shift your time using some functions and then you can use those data on the fly. So there are so many ways, as you see, there are so many options. So whichever you feel it is easy for you, whichever you feel it's very comfortable, you can adopt that. And so there is no thumb rule, okay, you must do this. So I don't say that. So whichever you are comfortable, whichever you think is right, you can stick to it. Okay. So any questions, guys? So please post your questions. I'm watching another monitor, so I don't see the questions chat window. So please bear with me. It may take some delay when I go through your questions. Okay. So now we have clear, okay, why we need test data and how to generate test data. So in this example, since we are using something very simple application, JPEG store, and if you go to the store, JPEG store, you can see some test data visibly on the screen and you can generate it on your own. So you don't need some kind of a tool or some script you need to write. So there's no such requirement here. So what I did, just to keep it very simple, I just navigated to each page and then I just grabbed the product ID as you see here, right? So product ID, let me zoom in. product ID and a name for each category. Say fish, dogs, reptiles, cats. So if you just click each link, you will see the product ID and name. So I just manually grabbed it and then I created a test data file. So test data file, ideally the ideal format is CSV, but you can use .txt or .dat. So any extension you can use, but CSV is very commonly used. Other team members also can easily recognize, or if any development team is working on your script, they can also understand, okay, this is CSV where it reading from the file. So follow the same process across your project so that everybody will be on the same page. If you're following .dat or .txt, follow the same format across all your projects. Okay, now let me open text editor. So let me open that test data file I generated. So here, as you see, I have some 11 rows of data. The first one is category, the product category, and product some ID and the product name and some item ID. So there are 4 columns here. Another typical example is like username password. So this is one of the commonly used examples. That's why I'm not using the username and password. I'm using something else. But username and password also a must test data file for any project, because you have to log in. Unless you don't have any login kind of functionality, you must log in into an application, so that you have to store all your credentials in one place, and then you have to read it from line by line or random. So this is another example where we have 4 columns. So each column has a particular data, and each row kind of a unique row here. So as you see, the first row, second row, third row, each row is unique because I'm keeping something as unique as possible. I'm not repeating myself to test the same data again and again for each checkout. So I'm trying to keep as unique as possible. Since it's a demo website, so I just created some 10 random unique rows. Okay, but in real project, you might end up in using millions of records, and sometimes you may not be able to open the text file. So you have to use something very powerful editor. I have faced that issue. So you have to increase some RAM size to open it, or it may take more time to open. So you have to take care how many rows it can hold in one file. So that is also important. But I'm talking about millions of rows, not thousands, millions of records. Okay. But in this case, you can open with any editor that this will work. Okay, now let us go to JMeter, and let us quickly go through our script we created last time. So these are the steps we have followed, right? So we launched the home page, we entered the store, fish that adding that particular product, and add to cart, checkout, and then at last it is asking for login, and then we are just logging in, and then we are just signing out. So this is a very simple flow we followed, and so this flow has issues. It will work fine, but it is not the best way to write scripts, execute your scenario. So one thing is, this is not parameterized because it is using the fish all the time. So whenever I execute this particular test plan with 10 threads or 100 threads, it keeps sending the fish product, and it will use my user ID, basically the J2EE thing. So it will use the same username and password again and again, and there are so many things that is made not taken care here. So this is a very basic script. It will do nothing. It's just for our smoke testing purpose, just to make sure all the request is going through fine or not. So that is the only thing this script is useful. So we are going to improve this script eventually. So this script will be available in my GitHub repository. I will post a link. You can also take a look for the next few sessions. So now, first you have to just go through each request manually, just traverse through each request and understand uh, what needs to be parameterized and where you have to parameterize your request. So there are 2 things: what needs to be parameterized and where. So you have to answer these questions before you run any performance testing. So once you decided this, so it depends on your project requirement. It depends on what you are trying to achieve. Sometimes you may not parameterize in all the places. Only in critical places you might parameterize, but try to parameterize in all the places wherever it is really required. Say for example here, wherever the category ID is fish, I need to parameterize. And similarly, if you go to the product, wherever the product ID is required, I have to parameterize this. And so on, you have to just navigate to each request and parameterize it. So to parameterize, there are multiple ways you can follow in JMeter. So there are, you can read it from database. That is one way you can do. And another way is to use functions. So there are a couple of functions you can use, CSV read and string to file. So these are function oriented parameterization. And another easy way is to leverage the dataset config. So this is one of the recommended way to parameterize our test data. But if you are talking about millions of records, then you might end up using the CSV read function. So the functions I know we have not touched, but let me just quickly explain the function. So if you go to tools menu in JMeter and click on function helper dialog, you can see these are some of the core functions in JMeter, which is created by the core community. So this will help you to achieve some task. So instead of writing your own snippet or your own function, first you have to come here and just go through each function and make sure it is not already created. So in this case, since we need to read something from the file, you can have a couple of functions. One is CSV read, and if you just scroll down, you can see there is a function called a string from file. So CSV read, if you just select, and then it will display the parameters. So here it is the first, there are two things. One is CSV file to read and the column number. So once you fill this details, and if we click on generate, it will give you one function name. For example, here say test data.csv, and I'm going to read the first column, starts with 0. And if you click on generate, it will give you one function syntax. So you can use this syntax anywhere in JMeter as is. It will be reading the data from your test data file. So no strings attached, just use as is. And if you want to read the second column, you can just change the number 1 and generate again. Again, you can use this function anywhere. So this is one of the way you can implement the data parameterization. But this way is kind of not very optimized basically. There are certain things you cannot do here, but this is one of the way you can implement. But if you want to have something advanced thing, then this function may not be helpful. But this function is pretty good for millions of records. But again, it comes with its own caveats, right? There are always trade-off. But most of the time, 99% of the any project or any scripts, if you see randomly, they will have the CSV dataset config. So this CSV dataset config is very simple way and an easy way to achieve the data parameterization. So now let me quickly go through the chat here. Okay, Ajay, okay. Generally, most of us are using the CSV dataset. My client requirement is different to produce the data in Notepad such a way that can be used to batch jobs. Yes, yeah, that is, yeah, correct, Ajay. Yeah, that is also one way of implementing the test data thing for your project purpose. Okay, cool. Any other questions I can see? Can use, okay, Surendra, we can use control prepare test data unique. I'm not understanding your question, Surendra. Counter, yeah, counter, yeah. Counter also we can use, yes, for unique data, or random also we can use. So there are so many ways, yes. Thank you guys for question. Okay, batch jobs. Okay, I will get back to you this Ajay and Ajaya. Okay, we'll proceed and then I will get back to you again. Okay. Okay, fine. So to add the this element, CSV dataset config, so you have to just right click on the third group and go to the config element category here and select the CSV dataset config. So this is how you add the CSV dataset config for your test plan. So you can add the test plan anywhere in your you can add the test data config anywhere in your test plan. So not necessarily under thread group. You can also add it under the test plan. So as you know, right, JMeter has a parent-child sibling relationship. So make sure you know where you are keeping it and what is the scope of the particular element. So the scoping I will cover in the eventual sessions. But make sure whenever you keep under test plan, it is shared across all the thread groups. Okay, so right now I have 3 thread groups here. So this particular dataset config is being shared between the thread groups. But if you want to keep only uh, the relation between the thread group, you have to just drag and drop inside the respective thread group. So now this particular test data is only for thread group 1. Thread group 2 or thread group 3 cannot access your test data. So because it is associated only to particular thread group. So this is a very simple concept. I know you were able to grasp this. So basically make sure you are keeping in the right place. So now let me just delete this since we already have. Okay, before we see the test data that config, so let us quickly see how the CSV read is working fine. So CSV read, so this is the function I was talking, and this is the file we have here. So this is the pet store hyphen testdata.csv, and we have 11 rows of record here. So now let me keep this aside, and I am reading the third index, basically the third column, basically 0, 1, 2. So third means it will read the angelfish. So the product name basically. And I have something called next. So here if you see index is 3 and I have something called next in another function. So next means what it will do is it will read the next row. So first it will execute the first row and immediately it will go to the next row and then it will print a sequential order. So right now let me just disable everything and let me disable thread group 2 and 3 and let us execute only the thread group 1 here. So inside the thread group 1 I have everything 1 1 1 here. So basically we are using one thread, 1 second ramp up and one loop count. So now if I execute this, it will print the est-1. So basically it is printing the first row. So now let me just increase the loop count to say 5. So now the CSV read will print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Basically it is going in the sequential order. So this is how the CSV read will work basically. So if you are planning to use, always use these two functions together. First one is the index you want to read and the next keyword, because you want to keep it as a loop. You have to read it in the sequential order. So you have to use both the functions together unless there is no such requirement from your side. Otherwise, I always recommend to club these two together. Otherwise, you cannot read in the sequential order. So by default, JMeter works in the sequential order. It cannot go random. Okay, just keep that in mind. If you want random, you need to depend on the third-party plugins. Okay, so there is one thing you need to take care. Next thing we are going to see the string from file. So there is another function I mentioned, right? So string from file. So this will read your file one line at a time. So it will not go by comma separated value. It will go by the line basically, each line, each row actually. So now if I execute the same thing, yeah, you can see it will print. Okay, some error is there. Okay, let me generate it again. Let me go to tools, string from file, and we have to give the right file name here, and I click on generate. Okay, let me execute why it is throwing erroring out. Okay, let me check the info here. Parsing as int value will not be considered as start number, sequence number. Okay, let us check the function again. Okay, it is relative path. Okay. Okay, so this file is present in my bin directory. So let me quickly verify that. So if you go to my tools, Apache JMeter, bin folder, let me quickly arrange this. Yeah, here you can see it is already present. So there is no problem in accessing it. Okay, I have to check this. It was working fine earlier today. Okay, fine. That is fine. I will debug this. It says no such file exception. Okay, let me quickly enter dot slash. Okay, still same error. That is fine. I will debug this later and then I will post some update either LinkedIn or YouTube. So let me disable this. So as of yeah, so there are two ways, easy ways. One is CSV read string from file if you are opting for the function based data parameterization. But even simpler is CSV dataset config. So let me quickly add the CSV dataset config here. So I'm keeping in the thread group one. So as you see here, because we are going to parameterize the thread group one thing. So I'm just keeping it inside the thread group one. So now the very first step is you need to enter the file name. So file name could be either absolute path or relative path. So I always prefer the relative path because absolute path means it will work in your system. If you're running it in your CI/CD or if your other teammate is trying to use your script, then it will fail. So always be configure the relative path. So in this case, the relative path is this one. Let me quickly select this and just put it here. You can also use dot slash also. So dot represents the current directory, present working directory, and slash also you can use, or you can just simply remove the dot slash. By default, it will look up your test data file in the bin folder. So as you see here, right, Apache JMeter 5.5 bin. But if you are using some other folder structure, then make sure you are using the relative path. So that is one thing you have to note, take care. Otherwise, it will not work in your CI/CD pipeline. So after configuring the file name, next step you have to mention the file encoding. So any file you create in Notepad or Notepad++ or text editor, it will have a encoding, right? File encoding. So here also I have the, what is it? Let me open the text editor. Okay, so here there should be a place to file, save as. Okay, so here you can see character encoding, and if you just select, you can see various encoding format and line ending. So here these options will be there in all the editors. So you have to select right encoding. Otherwise, you need to configure it accordingly here. So by default, usually UTF-8. So this is the format we use, and it is not mandatory to select anything. You can just keep it as blank also. It will go with the default value. And next to text field is variable names. So this is a comma delimited. So you have to use comma only. You cannot use slash t and all. So these variable names, it is important to identify the column names actually. So which column you are going to read, or you might having some tens of columns, tens of hundreds of columns. So you have to give a name to each column to identify uh, the each row. Otherwise, JMeter will not be able to understand which column to read. So you have to give some variable name. Since we have the four columns, so we can give something like this. Let me just quickly copy this. So these are the column names I am giving. So P underscore category, P underscore product ID, product name, and item ID. So each variable I am prefixing with P underscore. So P means basically it's a parameter, so that people can easily understand, okay, what is the variable type, just for your understanding purpose. Not necessarily you have to start with P, but it's kind of a common practice. And if it is an extractor or if it is a correlation, people use a C or EXT, something like that, so that people can understand, okay, this is a correlation value or extracted value, or this is the parameter value, so that you can easily distinguish between the variable names. So you have to enter the variable names. This is must in a comma separated value. And then ignore first line. So this is again very important configuration. So this ignore first line is false here by default. So let me open my text file here. So here, if you see, ignore first line is false. So this is my first line, right? So I am telling JMeter, do not ignore this. Okay. If you set this as true, what will happen? It will ignore the first line. Okay. So when you need this is, suppose I am planning to have the variable names inside my CSV file. So I don't want to keep that variable names in the element. I want to keep it in the CSV file. In that case, you can switch the flag to true. Okay. So again, there is no better way. It is really depends on your how comfortable you are, where you are want to keep it. You can either keep it in the CSV file or you can keep it in the element. Okay, but make sure you are switching the flag accordingly. Otherwise, first line will be either will be ignored or it will be read by a JMeter. So don't mix and match. Always keep one thing and follow this practice across all your test plans. So let me just keep it in the element so that I can easily refer here. Okay. So now I have to switch this flag to false. Okay. So this is one way of telling JMeter use the right row, uh, whether to ignore or not. Okay. Next is delimiter. So delimiter commonly used is comma, right? But you can use slash t or a space or whatever delimiter you want to use, you can use it. But commonly used is comma only. Always go with the some best practice or recommended way of configuring. So next one is allow quoted data. So this allow quoted data helps you to configure whether you have double quotes in your test data file or not. So by default, I don't have here any. I don't have any double quotes, but in your project, you might end up using double quotes in the test data file. Say for example, I instead of angel fish, I can have something like angel space fish, right? So I can have something like this. So if you have double quotes, you have to tell JMeter, okay, my test data file has double quotes, so please take care while reading it. Otherwise, JMeter will confuse with the special characters and all, then it will end up in failing. So you don't want that. So if you are planning to use double quotes in your test data file, you need to take care in the element accordingly. So let me just quickly remove this. I don't want double quotes in my test data file, and you can change this to false. Okay. So I know there are so many things, but you must know these concepts. Otherwise, you might end up configuring something else. Okay. Okay. Now let me quickly go through the remaining thing. Recycle on EOF. So EOF stands for end of file. Okay. So recycle means whether you want to reuse your test data. So end of file. So right now I have 11 rows. So after reaching 11th row, what needs to be done? Whether I want to reuse the data again and again, or I don't want to reuse. So that is what you are configuring the recycle on end of file. So by default it is true. Basically it will keep reusing your test data. That's what we need because we want to execute our script continuously, right, for 1 hour or 30 minutes, whatever the duration. So you want to tell JMeter, okay, recycle my test data. And another one is stop thread on EOF. So stop thread means whether the user needs to stop once it reaches the end of file. So again, this also is false. No, I don't want to stop because I want to continue running my virtual users or threads. And once they reach end of file, again they have to go back. It's like a cycle loop you can think of. So these two settings always keep opposite values. Okay, true or false. True, if it is for true, it is false. Then only you can keep reusing the test data again and again. But in some cases, you might end up using stop thread on EOF as true, because sometimes you might have your test data, uh, might not be reusable. Say once the test data is done, you cannot use it anymore. So in that instance, you can turn that stop thread on EOF as false, so that it will stop the thread. So some cases you might end up flipping the flags, but by default, common approaches keep recycling and keep reusing the data for all the threads. Okay, I hope everything is clear till now. If you have any questions, please post. I will go through. And last one is very important, also very confusing, and many people do not get in the first way of doing things with multiple data, right? So I have already posted one article about data parameterization. You can just check it out. I have also mentioned string from file, CSV here. Okay, so this is the syntax. I forgot this actually. So you have to mention the index, uh, that index. So this is what the exact syntax is. Anyhow, so you can just go through this link. I will just quickly post in the chat. Okay, you can go through this. And also I have posted the video also in my channel. You can go through, but I will just try to keep as simple as possible to understand better. Okay, sharing mode. So sharing mode means, so we have a file here, right? So we have a file called pet store test data. So how you want to share this particular file among threads or thread groups? Okay, basically a sharing mode. How you want to share, whether you want to share it with all the threads or all the thread groups or only specific thread group, etc. So these are the settings. Very simple, no nothing to worry here. By default, what I have seen only all threads. That's a default configuration people always go, because I want to share my file among all the threads in my thread group. Okay, because I want to, if I am running with 1000 virtual users, I want my test data to be accessible by those 1000 virtual users. So I don't want to restrict something to access. So by default, we keep all threads. So that is the default one. A very simple configuration. So nothing fancy here. But the next one is current thread group. So this file is only accessible to the current thread group. So I have, that's why I created 3 thread groups here. So I have thread group 1, 2 and 3. And if I am configuring as current thread group, so this particular file will be accessible only to the current thread group, which is thread group 1, which you cannot access it outside the thread group. So that's the option for this particular sharing mode is. Okay, if you want to share only for the current thread group, you can use this. And next one is current thread. So current virtual user, basically this one. So I want to share this file only for the current virtual users. You might end up running with 100,000 virtual users. So you are enabling this file to the current thread. Whichever thread is running, it will try to access. It will open, it will access. Again, another thread group, another thread virtual user will come. Again, it will open, it will read, it will close. So it will there will be a lot of reads will be happening. So this is not kind of a very best performant approach, but in some cases you might need this. I'm not come across any such scenario, but in case if you need, you can select the current thread. Okay. For detailed help, right, you can always refer the official documentation. So whenever I'm in doubt, I always come here. So I don't Google. My first point of reference is the official documentation. I don't Google, I don't go to any other website. I just come here and then read and understand. Okay. So here, as you see, all threads, the file is shared between all the threads. Current thread group means each file is opened once for each thread group in which the element appears. Okay. So everything is about file opening. So if you see the current thread, each file is opened separately for each thread. So there are so many opens will happen. So that is not very, very good in terms of performance or your resource utilization. So this is one of the not best way of handling the JMeter performance. Okay. Third, the fourth one is very confusing, identifier. So let me quickly explain with example. Let me enable all the thread groups here, and let me just keep it one one thread, one ramp up, and two. Similarly, thread group one, one, two here, and here also one, one, two. So basically, each thread group will have one thread, one ramp up, 1 second ramp up, and two loop count. Okay. So now I have all the CSV dataset config in all the groups as you see here, and in CSV dataset config one, basically in the first thread group, I am adding one identifier. So identifier can be anything. It could be some number, it should be some text, but make sure it is unique. Okay, give some name, give some ID. Okay. So now I am just having this ID called TG thread group 1 and 2. So I want to share this file or the data inside the file between thread group 1 and 2, not with 3. I don't want to share it with 3. I want to keep only thread group 1 and 2. Okay. But in thread group 3, I have another identifier called only thread group 3. So I have two identifiers. One is TG1 and 2 in thread group 1 and thread group 2. And in thread group 3, I have the only TG3. So basically this file, the test data is only accessible thread group 3. Okay, now let me execute this. Okay, I have to enable. Okay, I have to enable this one. Okay, let me clear my screen and run again. Okay, now as you see, the group 1 and 2 and the group 1 and 2. So basically the test data inside. Okay, here let me open the test data. So the group 1 and 2 will share these data because I have loop count 2. Thread group 3 will have its own flavor, its own row of reading the row. Okay. So basically, whenever you share, if you want to share between the thread groups, a customized way of sharing, then you can use the unique identifier. So if you see thread group 1 and 2, it will have EST1 and EST3 here. Let me run it with 1 actually. So 2 means it will be confusing. Let me run with 1. Okay. So as you see here, thread group 1 is 1, thread group 2 is 2, and thread group 3 is 1. So basically these two data will be shared between two thread groups. Now thread group 3 cannot access that data basically, okay, whenever it is running. So that is why we have given the identifier to pick up the right test data file, and then it will open, it will read the data. So this one you need to practice to understand with better clarity. Without practicing it, you might not get the concept. So you have to run it with the different settings. Okay. Okay. Now, since we have equipped with the knowledge of the CSV dataset config, so let me quickly disable the other thread groups. Let us concentrate on only one thread group. Okay. Now I have configured the CSV dataset config. Now it's time to parameterize. So we have not done any parameterization. We have done only the configuring the test data. We have nothing to do with our test plan actually. So now we are going to proceed further. We're going one step ahead. So now let me just expand or enable these three. So we have the this page, the category page. So we have fish here, right? So we are going to parameterize this particular category ID. So this category ID is basically this first one, first column. So just to copy this variable name, right click and copy, and go to the respective request, okay, and delete and add a dollar symbol, curly brace, and paste your variable name and close curly brace. So this syntax, whenever you see dollar curly brace, basically it is a variable in JMeter. You can use this syntax to read a variable value in runtime, and then the value will be replaced by JMeter. So whenever you want to read something, whenever you want to manipulate, you want to store something in the variable, and if you want to read it in subsequent requests, you can use the dollar notation. So this is across JMeter. So wherever you have dollar, you can just blindly you can just put this follow this syntax. Okay. Similarly, you have to go through each place. So let me go to product and enable the product here and product ID. So now let me go to the text editor, CSV dataset config, product ID, copy this and replace it here. So another hack is, suppose I want to quickly find and replace. So what you can do, you can use the control F. So here also you can do. So you can just quickly search and replace. So this is one way of quickly replacing the values. Another way is opening the test plan in an editor, and you can just use the find and replace in the editor. So that is another hack you can do. But yeah, you can use the GUI so that you can know where it is getting replaced. Okay, so now you have to just repeat the steps for all the requests. So I'm not going to repeat for everything. Let us execute only the first three things. Enter the store, and then here, and then here. Let me replace this also. So we don't need fish right here. So let me quickly replace this with the category ID. So category ID, and again I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste this. So now I'm going to enter the thread group loop count as say 10 times. Okay, I have 11 rows, so I'm just executing with 10. So now if you execute this, okay, as you see here, there are fish and there are cats. Okay, because only we have two products here, fish and cats. So it will go by sequential order, sequential row. So that's why we have 7 cats and 3 cats here. Sorry, 7 fish and 3 cats. So this is the default behavior in JMeter. So now if you open any product, as you see here, it is sending the product ID. And if you go to your another product, say 5, you can see the product ID. So this is replacing on the fly, basically. So here you can see cats. And here, if you go scroll up, you can see fish here. So like this, you can verify before you start any load testing. You have to verify this. Otherwise, sometimes you might do some small mistake and it might not replace it. So your request will fail sometimes. So always execute with a different, at least execute with the 2 threads and with say 5 loop count, and make sure all the threads, all the requests are going through fine or not. So this is the best way to debug your test plan. Okay. So any questions guys with respect to test data setup? Let me quickly go through the questions here. Okay, please explain the different types of threads, ultimate thread. Yeah, we have not come to use the multiple, third-party thread groups, Monica. But yeah, probably in future I may cover. But as of now, we are going with the core features of JMeter. So you can use the ultimate thread group for your customized workload model. Say I want to use something like a step by step, or I want some immediate ramp up, ramp down. So you want to design something very custom, then you can go with the ultimate thread group. But if you want something basic, you can use the default thread groups. And 5.5 has another thread group called open model. So if you go to right click, add threads, open model thread group. So this has some, you can do a lot of customization. So we will cover this probably in another session. But this is pretty new thread group model. It might have issues. So I have not used it extensively, but I have already posted a blog post about this and also video, I guess. You can go through my tutorial. Okay. So different thread groups serves for different purpose, but this is very basic workload model here. Okay, so any other questions, please post. So Ajaya, I have asked, okay, how can we do that? Okay, what is this? What is the data in notepad? Okay, such a way that can be used for batch jobs. So I don't understand your question. I don't know how we can do that. So could you please share more details, Ajaya? Really, I'm not sure. Uh, okay. So if you don't have any other questions, thank you guys for joining, and please subscribe to QA Insights channel so that I'm planning to conduct more sessions in future like this. So please join every week, and thank you guys. So let me just stop sharing it. Okay, I hope this session is pretty useful. If you have any questions, yeah, please post it in my community, or you can ping me LinkedIn. So let me just scroll up my community link here. So this is the website community.qainsights.com. You can just post the questions, and if you want to donate, you can use this link to donate. Okay. So I have another question. Could you please explain controllers? So controllers another day, Surendra. I'm not covering everything in one session. We are going one by one. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a good weekend, and see you in next session. Thank you.